Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. Have you ever imagined being an American countess, living in one of those grand European estates, and then suddenly you're thrust into this world of rising Nazism and World War II?
It's a really striking image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this collision of immense privilege with just unimaginable global upheaval.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. This story of, an actual person, an American countess who lived through it all.
And what's really fascinating is how her personal experiences really connect to these massive historical events.
Totally. It's like seeing history through this very human lens. So the book we're exploring is The Countess and the Nazis by Richard J. Hutto.
You'll find a link to it on Amazon down in the description.
Definitely check it out. And just a heads up, this isn't fiction. This is a true story.
Yeah.
But honestly, it reads like a thriller, with all the intertwined lives and the rising tension of pre-war Europe.
It really pulls you in.
Oh, absolutely. So if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive into history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.
We'll be doing plenty more of these.
Okay, so let's get into it. The woman at the heart of this story is Muriel Seherr-Thoss.
An American who became a countess living in Silesia, which is now part of Poland.
Right, and she had this front row seat to the rise of Nazism and the outbreak of World War II.
A truly unique perspective.
For sure. So to understand her story, we have to go back to her roots. Her father was Henry White, a really prominent American diplomat.
And her mother, Daisy Rutherford White, was a major figure in high society. She was known for hosting these incredible gatherings and was part of this elite intellectual circle they called the Souls.
Oh, yeah, the Souls. I've heard of them, like a super influential group, right?
Exactly.
So Muriel grows up surrounded by all this, international diplomacy and high society. The family had their estate in America called Hampton, but they spent a lot of time in Europe too, especially during Muriel's childhood.
And it seems like Daisy was super ambitious for her husband's career. She really believed in public service and saw diplomacy as a key way for Henry to make a difference.
So she wasn't just a socialite, she was really involved in his work.
Oh, yeah. She understood European culture and had this amazing social intelligence, which were huge assets in the world of diplomacy.
Makes sense. And then there's their time in London. They were friends with people like Edith Wharton and Henry James, major literary figures.
Not to mention all their connections within the British aristocracy. People like Lady Wemyss and Lord Elcho, they hosted them at their homes, Ramslade and later Wilton Park, which became hubs for Anglo-American social life.
Wow, so they were right in the thick of things.
Absolutely. And these social gatherings weren't just about parties and fun. They were actually a form of informal diplomacy, building relationships and understanding between countries on a personal level.
That's fascinating. So Muriel is growing up immersed in this world of, global connections and influence. But then things take a really interesting turn. She marries Hermann Manny, Count Seherr-Thoss, a Prussian nobleman.
From a very old and established family with these vast estates in Upper Silesia, places called Dobro and Rosenschau.
So she goes from this American upbringing to the heart of Prussian aristocracy. It's a huge shift.
It is, and it really highlights the differences between the American and European social structures at the time. In America, it was more about individual achievement. But in Prussian nobility, it was all about birthright lineage and inherited land.
Right, Manny was a hereditary member of the Prussian House of Lords. That's all about inherited status and power.
Exactly.
And we get these glimpses into Muriel's first experiences at these estates, Schloss Dobro and Rosenschau. Talk about a culture shock.
It must have been such a contrast to her American life.
Totally. And the social customs of the Silesian gentry sound so formal and traditional. They had these elaborate hunts that even Kaiser Wilhelm II would attend.
Oh yeah, those hunts were a big deal, not just for sport, but as these social rituals that reinforced the aristocratic hierarchies. And having the Kaiser there just amplified their importance, showing the close ties between the nobility and the emperor.
But then the early 20th century hits and everything changes. World War I and the German Revolution totally upend the world of the Seherr-Thoss family and the German nobility in general.
Titles were abolished. The old social order was collapsing. It was a period of intense upheaval.
So how did someone so rooted in tradition react to all this, the fall of the Kaiser?
It seems like it was incredibly traumatic for him. He saw the Kaiser as a symbol of order and stability, the way things were supposed to be. So his downfall was like the collapse of his entire world.
I can only imagine. And then on top of everything, there are the Silesian uprisings after the war.
This region was a battleground with Polish nationalists fighting for independence and Germans trying to maintain control.
So much violence and instability. There were bridges being blown up, clashes between French troops and insurgents, just chaos.
It was a really dangerous and uncertain time for everyone living there. Think about it, like bridges near Muriel's home were destroyed. That's how close the conflict was.
Wow. And Muriel is in the middle of it all, trying desperately to protect her family. She even reaches out to her father in America for help, which must have been incredibly difficult with communication being what it was back then.
And then to make matters worse, the family starts facing serious financial problems.
Because of the war and the political instability.
Exactly. It hit a lot of aristocratic families hard. Land values were fluctuating, they were losing their traditional privileges and sources of income. It was a tough time.
So all this leads to tension between Muriel and Manny. They even end up living in separate residences, Krastowitz and Herzogenaurach.
It seems like their marriage was really strained under all this pressure.
And then comes the rise of the Nazis. Even with their social standing, the whites couldn't ignore what was happening.
There's this account of them attending a party where the German foreign minister was present and everyone was giving the Hitler salute.
Chilling. So how did they react to this new movement?
It seems like reactions among the old aristocracy were mixed. Some saw Hitler as a potential savior, someone who might restore the monarchy or at least bring back some of their lost status. But Muriel seemed to be skeptical of the Nazis from the start and tried to keep her family distanced from them.
She saw the danger signs early on.
It seems so. And there's this incredibly brave story about her protecting a Jewish classmate of her granddaughter.
Wow, talk about taking a stand.
It was a powerful act of resistance against the growing tide of prejudice. And we also get insights from George Messersmith, the U.S. minister to Austria.
He was keeping an eye on things.
Oh, yeah, he was a shrewd observer of the political landscape. And he saw the dangers of the Nazi regime early on. He even mentions visiting Countess Seherr-Thoss and witnessing this unsettling encounter with young men demanding to see her swastika.
So the pressure and intolerance were building?
Absolutely. And then there's that amazing story about the SS officers showing up at Krastowitz during dinner.
I read about that. They just barged in.
Yep. And Muriel completely ignored them. Just continued eating like they weren't even there.
That's so bold.
It shows just how much she despised the regime. And she even challenges them, asking how dare they enter her house.
Talk about standing up for herself. But her resistance went beyond just words. She actively helped Jewish people escape persecution.
Like this tailor named Arthur Lederer, who had even made uniforms for her staff. It was incredibly risky, but she felt she had to do something.
And she had support. Lady Max Muller was sending her money to help with these efforts.
It's amazing, these women risking everything to help others.
It really is. Now, there's another fascinating aspect to Muriel's story, her connection to Queen Geraldine of Albania.
It's a whole other layer to this incredible life.
Right. So Muriel ends up playing a significant role in Geraldine's life. It starts with her negotiating Geraldine's education in Hungary with her grandmother, Countess Margaret Apponyi.
So Geraldine's family was another prominent noble family, but they'd hit some hard times financially. And her grandmother was very religious and worried about Geraldine being raised in France with her mother and stepfather.
So she asked Muriel to step in.
Exactly. And Muriel was able to convince Geraldine's mother to let her oversee Geraldine's education back in Hungary.
Sounds like those diplomatic skills came in handy.
For sure, she was seen as a trustworthy figure, someone who could bridge cultural differences. And this marked the beginning of a lifelong friendship between Muriel and Geraldine.
And later, Muriel even attends Geraldine's wedding to King Zog of Albania. That must have been something else.
It was a huge event, especially with Italy's growing influence over Albania at the time. Mussolini's son-in-law, Count Ciano, was even the best man.
Wow, talk about political intrigue.
It was a sign of the times. And of course, Italy ends up invading Albania, and the royal family has to make this dramatic escape.
And Muriel's there witnessing it all firsthand.
Yeah. She describes the Turkish minister's warnings, the coded telegrams, the chaos of the escape. It's like something out of a movie, and Queen Geraldine had just given birth days before.
Oh my gosh, they were fleeing for their lives.
They were. But even through the war, Muriel and Geraldine stayed in touch through coded letters.
Really?
Yeah, Muriel called her G, or my dearest. It shows how strong their bond was.
That's incredible. So while all this is going on, Muriel's sons, Boise and Cincy, are in the U.S. and get classified as enemy aliens.
Which must have been so worrying for her, even though they were physically safe.
Absolutely. And then there's Muriel herself. Despite the danger, she refuses to leave Dobrau. She even starts helping down British pilots.
Such bravery. But that put her in serious danger with the Gestapo.
They were not happy about it.
Not at all. They started pressuring and threatening her, but she stood her ground.
And then tragically, she dies under very mysterious circumstances. The official report says a skull fracture, but there are other accounts suggesting an accident or even suicide. What do you make of all that?
It's hard to say for sure. There was so much chaos and violence at the time, plus the immense stress she was under. It's possible a family friend tried to soften the blow with a less distressing explanation. But the fact that German authorities had taken away her passport is troubling. It makes you wonder if she even had the option to leave.
It's a heartbreaking end to her story, and the tragedy doesn't stop there. Schloss Sebrau is destroyed, and there are reports of horrific atrocities committed by Soviet soldiers in the area.
It was a brutal end to the war in that part of Europe. And Manny eventually flees to Austria and remarries. It seems like he was just trying to find some sense of normalcy after everything he'd been through.
But Muriel is buried at Dobrau, the place she refused to abandon. And years later, Manny's reported to have said, "Your mother was right after all." It sounds like he finally realized the weight of her choices and the warnings she'd given.
A powerful realization. It makes you think about how we often don't understand the full impact of someone's actions until much later.
So true. But even though Muriel's story ends there, her family saga continues. Her daughter Margaret marries Ted Church, and there's this whole intriguing connection to the exiled King Zog.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tangled web. Ted Church's involvement with the family and King Zog seems to have been complex, maybe driven by his own ambitions,
And the CIA even took an interest.
which suggests there was something politically significant about his relationship with Zog. But he was also critical of the family, which just adds another layer of complexity.
It's fascinating how these personal stories intersect with global events.
It really is. And then you have Muriel's sons, Boise and Cincy, who go on to lead interesting lives in the U.S. Boise and his second wife, Sunny Fex, become major philanthropists.
It's like that spirit of generosity from their mother lived on in them.
Absolutely. Despite all the hardship they'd endured, they found a way to make a positive impact on the world.
And even Margaret, later in life, she follows in her mother's footsteps by helping relatives escape from behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. It's as if that resilience and compassion was passed down through generations.
A beautiful legacy. It shows how the experiences and values of one generation can shape the next.
So to wrap it all up, Muriel Seherr-Thoss lived this incredible life. From the privilege of American and European aristocracy to the horrors of war and political turmoil. But ultimately, it was her resilience, courage, and compassion that defined her.
An inspiring figure for sure. And her story raises some important questions for us all. What makes people act with courage in the face of overwhelming adversity? How do our values guide us during times of crisis? And how do these historical events continue to affect us generations later?
Big questions to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Muriel Seherr-Thoss. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did.
If you did, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what parts of Muriel's story resonated with you the most.
And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future deep dives into history. Until next time, keep exploring.